Hello, everybody and Base community. I'm Paige McFeely, CEO and co-founder of Base, and I'll be your moderator for today's session with Tim Whitmire of CXN Advisory. Our panel today is going to focus on how you can align yourself with your executives and your company's goals, specifically as it relates to OKRs, which, just to orient everybody, stands for objectives and key results. We will get well into that in a moment. But first, everybody join me in welcoming our guest, Tim Whitmire.
Glad to be here.
Tim Whitmire, for everybody, is the founder of CXN Advisory, a consulting practice that advises leaders of high impact organizations on connecting vision and strategy with execution. Tim has found incredible success through helping executives manage their goals and OKRs, and has inspiring use cases that he's going to share with us on how assistants have aligned themselves to this. We connected with Tim, it's almost a few months ago now, and he has been such a great advisor for us, specifically on how we can use this language with our base community. So we are so excited to have him here today. A couple housekeeping things before we dive in. I want to share that Liz, our amazing Vice President of Marketing, is here on the line with us off camera. And she's going to be here monitoring the questions. So I encourage everybody to drop questions into the chat, whether you're watching in our Facebook group or on YouTube. And she'll be feeding them to us. So if there's a question that's really pertinent to the topic that we're discussing, we'll do our best to get to it. If not, we're going to save the last little bit of time at the end for some live Q&A. So please don't be shy with your questions. Okay, so Tim, it is such an honor to have you here today. Before we jump into our discussion, can you share a quick background and overview of what you do with everybody?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. So I've done a bunch of different stuff in my career. I was a journalist actually for a number of years, mainly with the Associated Press. So normally I would be recovering from a late election night today, but left journalism in the mid 2000s. Worked for a couple of different investment banks here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I've lived for the last 20 years, and then. At one point in 2011, was the founder of a workout group here in Charlotte called F3 Nation, which is a free network of early morning kind of boot camp style workouts for men that a friend of mine and I started here in Charlotte, and that it turned into a national kind of phenomenon. And so it was in the course of building out the network nationally that I really kind of started learning a lot about leadership and about goal setting and how to basically effectively grow something that in that case was non-revenue generating. So we had to get very creative and be very clear about what our goals were. And that led me down this path to where I now have my own consulting practice where I work with executives and other leaders on leadership development, goal setting, and execution against plan. So been doing what I do now for about the last 3 or 4 years, and as you alluded to, have had just a number of different awesome relationships with company leaders and opportunities to see folks use particularly this goal setting framework of OKRs to really increase impact and be effective.
That's awesome. I did not know that the connection between the workouts and the OKR connection, because as I understand it, you've got quite a bit of a cult following with that, and
It's
a celebrity in that space. It's pretty cool.
Yes, I'm one of 2 co-founders of the group, and so everybody knows me in the F3 community by my F3 nickname, which is OBT. So
Okay.
yes, so and they actually, I think you're down in Greenville, South Carolina. They got a very active group in Greenville, so hopefully get down there at some point and visit them.
Yeah, that's so great. Okay, so let's jump into our conversation. I want to spend a couple minutes just orienting our audience on this framework. Some of us might be new to this. I know I'm relatively new to this way of thinking and planning and aligning my day and my time. So before we dig into the nitty gritty, can you define OKRs for us and why they matter on a high level?
Sure, absolutely. And that, look, so O and KR stand for objectives and key results. Okay. And so that's your basic structure of how you're conducting goal setting. One of the things I say about this is, though, OKRs are, they happen to be kind of flavor of the month right now in the business world. There was a very popular book written and published a couple years ago about OKRs called Measure What Matters that kind of brought this framework to the front of mind for a lot of people. And that's made it very, very popular. But fundamentally, you're talking about basic, strong goal setting, behavior, which is something that, I think there's the biblical verse about there's nothing new under the sun. And there's really nothing that's changed in the whole of human existence about effective goal setting. So OKRs happen to be a framework that work well and are popular right now. But you think about something like MBOs, management by objective, or SMART goals, and I can't even remember what SMART stands for, but one of them is measure. There's a system out there called Traction that a lot of startups like to use. And then you have plenty of other goal setting frameworks. And what I want folks to understand is that this is one and it works well in some ways, but it's just at the end of the day, it's ultimately about setting goals and about holding people accountable for them. So.
Yeah, and we'll dig into that too a little bit, because I imagine some of our audience, their business is using OKRs, and some are probably using some other framework, or even the framework that doesn't have a name to it. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to be really clear on why it matters, if especially in the assistant role, why it matters that your role is aligned to the OKR of your executive, to your organization, and how that maybe even could protect your job in the future.
Yes, absolutely. So look, that ultimately the reason that the goal setting system or any goal setting framework it exists is to call out the things that are most important. And we all know, and Paige, you're an entrepreneur, you know this. It's very easy on a daily basis to sit down in front of your computer or even pick up your phone, and you've got 50, 100, 200 different things coming at you from all different directions, right? And you could, in theory, spend your entire day basically fighting brush fires. And, I'm going to respond to this email, and then I'm going to respond to that one, and so forth. And what the goal setting, any good goal setting framework, and particularly OKRs does is step back and say, okay, I'm going to look at this period of time that's ahead of me, very commonly a quarter at a time, right? Because we all, we sort of operate on those 3-month intervals. But it could be a year ahead of time. It could even be 6 months. And what are the 3 to 5 most important things that I've got to make sure I work on that are going to get me moving forward in the business? And so I talk a lot with clients about these are the things that you're going to really privilege with your time. And you might get distracted on any given day by this brush fire or that brush fire, but you need to understand that if you get to the end of the 3 months and you haven't accomplished these 3 to 5 things that you said you would, you're not getting where you need to as an enterprise. So it's really a way of calling out the things that are most important and putting them on a bit of a pedestal and saying, okay, this is what I'm going to really focus on. Now, where that comes into play for the assistant is, as you all know, your boss and your executive would not have an assistant if they did not have a million different things coming at them every day. That's part of what the assistant's role is to do, is to field a lot of those ground balls, as they say in baseball. Well, if you can make part of your role helping keep your executives' eyes on the prize in that regard, helping them keep focused on the things that they've said that they're going to do this quarter and they're going to accomplish, that's a value add for you. You've made yourself extremely useful to your executive in that regard.
Yeah, I so agree with that. And one of the biggest pain points that I frequently hear from assistants, and I'd love to hear in the comments too if people agree with me on this, is that assistants, just by nature of their role, end up catching a lot of those brush fires themselves constantly. Yet the way that they often are the most celebrated in their role and the most appreciated in their role goes beyond putting out those brush fires. It's really being that strategic partner, that second brain to their executive. And so I've seen, just in my working relationship with my assistant, Natalie, that in her kind of putting up the her own framework or her own guardrails for how she says yes or no to allocate her time, aligned with my OKRs and the leadership team's OKRs, have really turned her into this like secret weapon, not just for me supporting me, but for base as a whole. She's this powerhouse that can't be stopped. And it's been an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah, so I love that you use that term strategic partner, because so much of what OKRs is about is being strategic, right? It's saying, and look, the companies that do this really well, they start at the top and they've got kind of company level objectives for the year or even the quarter. And then you're going to sort of cascade down through the roles, and you're going to ask individuals at each level of the organization to set their goals and to make sure that their goals are aligned to those company goals, right? So if I am the CFO, I'm going to set some goals that align directly to the top level company goals for the year or for the quarter. And I'm going to have a conversation with whoever's running OKRs for the company about, okay, this is why I'm really putting a lot of effort in this area, because it aligns with our desire to grow by 6% this year. And this is what I'm doing that's going to support that. And so what you're seeking in all of that is ultimately alignment. And so the value in that strategic ad is if the assistant can insert themselves into that relationship, and particularly if you can build the trust and accountability that I think always exists in a good assistant relationship. Now you've got an opportunity to help your executive really stay focused and remain strategic in how they're behaving on a daily basis. So the term business often calls to mind busyness, and there is a busyness that comes with an executive role or with an assistant to an executive role, and OKRs become a way of really dismissing some of that and really focusing in on what's important. You're on the front line of a lot of that busyness, but you're going to help your executive really stay focused on what they've said they're committing to this quarter.
Yeah, I love the mental image of an assistant helping to clear away the stuff from their executive's plate, mind, inbox, whatever, and pointing them like an arrow. And so that aligns really well. I'm curious, over the last 8 months or so, as we've all shifted to becoming remote workers and all of a sudden finding ourselves in this future of work that we have talked about for so long, how has either your coaching changed or adapted to this, or are you seeing that OKRs are becoming even more crucial to have alignment on?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I've spent a lot more time in my home library here, and my wife is set up on the back porch doing her. I sit in here, and we've all gotten very used to kind of this conversation by video, and I think probably have all gotten better at it. The reality is, though, when you're not in the office with people every day, you lose that opportunity for kind of the in between moments, the stereotypically the water cooler moments, the passing in the hallway, the meetings where a lot of organizations find a lot of alignment in those moments, right? That's when you stop and you have the casual conversation. You realize, oh, really need to coordinate with that person on this thing I'm working on, and you miss that a lot. And so the OKR framework, or any strong goal setting framework, is really helpful in this scenario to try to keep everybody aligned. I have an illustration of this that I often use with clients, and I center it on Charlotte because that's where I live. But there's the two streets that meet at the center of downtown Charlotte are Trade and Tryon streets, and I'll tell folks, if you and I start walking directly north from Trade and Tryon streets in Charlotte, and we're just 1 degree of alignment apart. Think of a circle 360 degrees, and there's only 1 degree of separation in how we're aligned. By the time we get to Winston-Salem, which is roughly 90 miles north of here, we're going to be 5 miles apart from each other. And so you get that, and I use that as an illustration of, if you and I in business are misaligned even slightly as executives, or as an executive and assistant, and we walk 1 week down the path, go a month down the path, it just gets wider and wider, that separation. Yeah. And so for me, a really effective goal setting framework is to keep everybody in alignment. Here's what we're driving toward. We're all headed on the same path. And then the power of OKRs comes in the regular check-ins. It's, are we still hitting what we said we were going to do? And that's where the key results come in. For each objective that you set, you want to have 3 to 5 measurable key results that tell you whether you're making progress toward those objectives. And So that ability to sit down and say, okay, yeah, we're on track here. We're aligned. We're going to make it to this thing that we said we were going to do. That's impactful, and that helps keep people in that alignment that's so easy to lose when you're working remotely.
Mm-hmm. I love that a lot. So I think a lot and talk a lot about, now that we're all remote, context sharing is harder than it's ever been. And it's those
Yeah,
water cooler moments. It's making sure that we all have access to all the information that we need, not just, like high level or top line information, but those little nitty gritty context details that can give you that 1 degree separation at the start. And it makes me think of how the two assistants on our team work together and how they work to make sure that our entire team stays in the loop and aware of everything that we're doing in a way that's value adding versus
yeah,
noise adding. And I don't know that a lot of executives really think about the team of assistants that are within their organization as that as really a valuable, crucial tool to make sure that you don't get that 1 degree of separation. Because if the
yeah.
assistants know where the executives need to be pointing and they're the ones keeping them on track and communicating with one another, um, that could be really darn powerful.
Absolutely. And I think somebody just popped up in one of the chats that I see scrolling on the right talking about, I track my executives' goals and we have robust conversations around his executives to help me set his objectives, help me set mine. And then I'm the project manager to keep him on track. And that is a highly desirable relationship. And particularly, for anyone who's concerned about kind of being made redundant in this economy or in the current situation. And certainly that, the executive role has shifted greatly over the last, call it 50 years, as various technological advances have come along. That's someone who's made themselves that strategic partner that we're talking about. And a lot of it is around building that trust with your executive, to where they can rely on you and count on you to hold them accountable, and they're willing to give you that power as well.
I love that. I want to shift the conversation now, and I see some of these questions coming
Yeah.
into of how do you get started with this, whether or not your executive and or your organization is using this particular framework. We know that they have some measure of goals and objectives that they're
Yeah.
working towards. So any tips for how to introduce this workflow to your executive, or at least like this language and saying, hey, I'm a part of this?
Yeah, so sometimes where OKRs or whatever goal setting framework you're following as a company, where that lives within the organization varies greatly. And I'll tell you the two places where I see it most commonly, and then I'll give you a little explanation of why I actually don't like either of those places. But most commonly, goal setting is handled either within the people/HR organization, or it's within operations, and that might be business operations, or there might be a COO, or there might be a VP of operations, and those are the two most common places to put it. Now, if they're housed within HR and they kind of live within HR, then there's a reasonable chance that goal setting is linked to comp in some way. That people are being asked to set goals at the beginning of the year, and ultimately how they get paid at the end of the year, whether they get bonused or not, that's gonna have something to do with whether they hit their goals or not. If it's living over in operations somewhere, more likely they're being used. This is very common in a lot of software companies where you've got kind of regular sprints going on, or somebody who's really tracking a work board on a daily, weekly, monthly basis for deliverables like beta testing and updates to the software and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a much more kind of granular thing, and we're going to have a bunch of short-term goals, and we're going to run a sprint, and then we're going to use Jira and all that kind of stuff to track tickets and all that kind of thing. I personally, if I have the opportunity to come into an organization and help start OKRs from scratch, which is really kind of the core part of my business, is to help people get them off the ground. I actually like doing it through the CFO's office, because the finance organization is separated from that HR function. The dirty secret of HR is if you let people set goals and their comp is tied to them, they're going to sandbag their goals. and they're going to set goals that they know they can achieve that year because we all want to get paid. And then, the flip side is if goals live within operations, often they become very kind of near term focused, and we're very much down in the weeds and grinding stuff out daily. My approach to OKRs is I assume that as a business, you know how to run your business, you know how to make money, you know how to. OKRs are really about what is the company doing and what are the individuals who are leading the company doing to meet the future before it gets here. So a lot of times OKRs are really focused on aspirational stuff. It's not on, hey, we're going to set a goal of manufacturing 85 widgets next month and we only manufactured 80 this month. Like, I know you know how to make widgets. So the first thing to do would be to kind of figure out where the goal setting framework is living, and then secondly, find the person who's kind of running that and in charge of that, and say, I want to be helpful in this. I want to put my hand up. I think that I've got a role to play here that can be a positive one, and how can I help you help my boss be a little bit more accountable to this? Because that's the other, I mentioned a dirty secret of one thing earlier. The dirty secret is a lot of executives either are not very good at being held to metrics, or not very good at following metrics, first of all, or don't want to be held to them and held accountable to them. So a ton of it is about having that relationship where you can have that trust and you can be the person that they're willing to be held accountable by.
Yeah, I love that. We're getting so many great questions coming in. One of them is really interesting that I can't see the user's name here because it comes from Facebook, but it says, I'm aware of their goals, but I'm in a highly scientific department, an area I am very unfamiliar with. I'm the department administrator and work on administrative functions, so I cannot find a way to get involved in the science. Can you give some tips on this person, for this person?
Yeah, so look, I mean, this is, again, and particularly if you're in a company that's highly scientific in that regard, look, there is a lot of talk out there, and it sort of floats around in the atmosphere of big data this and big data that, and companies have to find a way to use their data. The reality is a lot of companies have a lot of data but aren't very good at using it. And so what you're trying to do, you're not responsible for setting those numbers that are going to be set as part of the goals, but to the extent you can educate yourself about what they mean and why they're important, and you can get literate on those are things that in your company have been identified as the drivers of success in the business, I would assume. And to the extent that you can get up to speed and understand why they're important, and I think that's that's a little bit of a humility conversation, but it's just, hey, I'm not a rocket scientist. You all know that. That's why I'm an assistant and not one of the rocket scientists over here. But if you can just educate me on this enough so that I understand why these are the numbers that are most crucial, that will make me stronger at making sure that I'm focusing my executives' attention on those numbers. And so that little bit of knowledge now makes you a strategic partner in that. So
I agree. I think understanding the why behind those numbers is really important. I'm certainly, I mean, I look at our head of products, OKRs, and I am whatever the opposite of a software engineer is, that's what I am. So I understand, but I understand the why behind his OKRs, and the same way that his assistant has really aligned herself so well with his specific OKRs. For instance, security reviews are a big part of what he does. She's not the one answering those questions because they're such nuanced, hard to answer questions, yet she's become this internal expert, has developed a white paper for us on it, and has really identified how her particular skill set can really add leverage to Jeremy's time and to what he's doing in a really, really impactful way. So for all of you out there, I would say that it's not important for you to actually look at achieving the OKRs for your executive, but staying clear on progress against OKRs and helping your executive to stay focused on what they're doing in a very short term time period of what are the 2 to 3 things you're going to do next week that are going to drive you towards the completion of your OKRs, so that you're there holding them accountable. And then you've also got the context and the information you need that you can push out to the rest of the team, maybe to your counterpart assistants. Maybe you're doing a leadership roll up. And I know there are a bunch of OKR software options out there.
Yep.
We, of course, use Base. We use, for our progress against OKRs, we use a weekly digest for this, and then weekly decision stream questions, which we'll touch on at the end of this. But there are a lot of different ways, I think, that to track it. I think clarity is the most important. So, from my opinion.
And that ability to just sort of ask why is this important, and get clarity on that without getting into the weeds is just hugely valuable. So now you're clear on why this is important, and you can sort of drive forward with strengthening that.
Yeah, great. Another question came in that I thought was pretty interesting. For a small team, this is for a charity that has a staff of 7. Yep. They don't have any sort of framework. Any suggestions for where to get started with that?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I put a little deck together that's kind of an introduction to OKRs. When we're going to send that around to participants afterward, and feel free to. It's got my contact information on that. So first of all, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to give an hour or so of my time to anybody who's interested in talking. A lot of that starts with, kind of mission, vision, and values, right? So when I come in fresh to a new organization, I've done this organizations as small as my daughter's year-round swim team. I'm sitting down with the head coach and owner of that team, and we're talking about, all right, what's our mission? What are our core values? How do we get those out in the world? And then how do we develop a set of objectives for Aquatic Team of Mecklenburg that will advance those core values over the next year? And so it really, no objective is going to work if it's not rooted in kind of hardcore mission. And I don't, when I talk about mission, I don't mean whatever the mission statement is on your website, which on most corporate websites can be basically boiled down to be everything to everyone. And we like puppies and kittens and rainbows and unicorns, right? No, I mean, it's more like the real mission. Like, we're here to cure cancer. I don't know if that's your particular charity, but like whatever it is, that's the focus and the purpose of your charity. It's whatever that mission is, and then we're going to set some objectives that flow naturally from that mission. And look, frankly, starting with a staff of 7 is great, because you're not trying to push it down through 15 different layers of the organization, from, highly paid CEO all the way down to, the lowliest intern. It's really a matter of we got 7 people, and we got to just be clear on mission and completely aligned in what we're all driving toward.
Yeah, that's great. One question that I wanted to get your take. I know you've introduced us to some really great assistants since we've gotten to know you that have really embodied this concept of aligning your role to the role of to your executives' OKRs. Can you share just some kind of high-level real-world examples of how that's played out?
Yeah, I mean, there was one company I worked at that was a SaaS business, software as a service, and a little bit later stage than Base is. But we went in and we put a full OKR system in there, and honestly, the CFO was the driver of it, and he was kind of my main client. The CEO, who was the founder of the company, he was kind of on the whole OKR thing. He was happy to let the CFO run this, and he thought it might be productive. But as far as he was concerned, we'll kind of let you see if that works or not. And there was a young woman who was working for him as his assistant, who you've met, Paige, who I introduced you to, and she was able to really kind of, I was able to spend some time with her actually, and almost work around the CEO a little bit. And enlist her support for what we were trying to get him to do and what we were trying to keep him focused on. And so a lot of times there's an opportunity, if your CEO is not particularly, susceptible to being held accountable for metrics and so forth, to kind of work around there and still kind of, sneak the vegetables in the side, like we used to do with my kids when they were really young, so put a lot of mashed potatoes on there and get them the green beans and the peas in there. But that ability, and now you've made yourself a strategic partner, almost without them even knowing it, quite honestly. So that watching the way Danny did that was really pretty impressive. So.
Yeah, I was so amazed with that conversation with her, where she has really leaned into this in such a way that it has provided a decision-making framework for everything that she is doing as well. I
Yeah.
mean, they have
Yeah.
2 all-hands stand-ups every week reviewing progress against OKRs, and she has become not only this internal champion and cheerleader of it, but she has embodied it, which I have
Yeah.
to imagine as we look at assistants who are becoming so strategic in this way through every single thing that they're doing, the pathways that this is opening up for them within their career, within that particular role, just for enhanced or evolving responsibility, but also for future roles. Are you seeing that progress as well, or any tips on that for how to really set
Yeah,
yourself up?
absolutely. Look, and I that the assistant role is one I have a lot of respect for, in no small part because a lot of my motivation and what I do as a consultant is I'm really motivated by I love serving other people, and it's like you could pay me $5 for the day, or you could pay me $5,000 for the day, and that doesn't make as much difference to me as if I feel like I've really made a difference in somebody's life today. If I walk out the door at the end of the day and I feel like I've made your life better, in some way today, or I've added something, that's kind of what I need in terms of what kind of drives me in my career, and I think that's a basic assistant motivation right there, right? You're there to make things better. When you show up, things get better, and that your ability. So for a lot of for some group of the audience today, you may be, this is all I ever want to do. This is my calling. This is what I'm called to do. But for those who are, motivated to say, I want to move up. I'm in an organization that's growing. There, I want to, what are my paths to greater responsibility and so forth. There are a ton of organizations out there that really ultimately need a chief of staff role. They need somebody to kind of lead the administrative functions, for the business. And to me, that ability to be strategic in your assistant partnership is the way that you ultimately level yourself up and demonstrate, what, I'm the kind of person who ultimately ought to be a chief of staff. I'm the kind of person who is that key strategic liaison between the folks who are, kind of getting the widgets out the door and the support functions of the business.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing this shift culturally, and it's not quite a universal shift yet, but seeing an evolution of the celebration of the role of assistant right now, where it used to be even 5, 6, 7 years ago when I first got into this space, it's almost 8 years ago now, that some of the companies that we would work with would not treat their assistants with respect, and they would kind of look at it as this, we didn't hire you for this other role, so we're going to put you in this role. And I'm proud to say that I'm not seeing that as much now. I know we've got a long way to go in terms of celebrating this role, but I think the end result of this is that we're going to see a lot of upward mobility within the space, where we're seeing teams, team leaders that are managing other teams of assistants. We're seeing people progress into the chief of staff role. We're seeing them really build whole departments and professional development suites around themselves in ways that were not all that common before.
Yep.
Because I think if you look at some industries, like the entertainment industry, commonly people become an assistant because they want to be an actor or producer or whatever. But I
Yep.
think we're going to start seeing people say, hey, no, I want to be an assistant. That's one of my kind of pipe dreams, is getting to the point where people want to be an assistant when they grow up. And I think some people do this, but I think it's going to become more common because it's such a crucial role, and we're starting to see that cultural shift, of people realizing businesses wouldn't operate without these crucial people. Pretty exciting. So we've
Absolutely.
seen this question a couple times, and I know it's in your deck that we'll send as a
Yeah.
follow-up, but some specific examples of OKRs and how they're specifically stated. Because I know it makes sense for me anyway, when I've read OKRs, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally get that. And then I sit down to write them and it can feel really overwhelming to start.
Yeah, so and you'll see this example in the deck, but I'll explain it now because I think it'll help make the stuff that's in the deck a little more comprehensible. So the classic way of approaching any goal, and we all do this because we're humans, and we look at something and we think, okay, I'm going to go from A to B to C to D to E, and then I'll get there. I'll have arrived at my goal. And so the example I really like to use for this is, and some people in the audience may be able to relate to this, is you're running a marathon for the first time. You decide to train for a marathon. You're going to run that first marathon. You go online and you look up first time marathon training plans and download it, and it's 16 weeks, and it's, got every day of the week plotted out and how many miles you're going to run on that day and what you're going to do. And your typical first time marathoner will print that calendar out and try to follow, connect the dots, basically. Okay, I'm going to do 2 miles today and 4 miles tomorrow. And then what happens is that something called contingency happens, which is also known as life, which is known as the year 2020. Random stuff starts happening, right? You get to that weekend where you're supposed to run, do a 12-mile long run as part of your training, and your wife is out of town and you need to watch the kids, and maybe you're a little bit injured and it's raining, and all of a sudden you can't do that 12-miler. And the first timer and the novice at this will say, oh my gosh, I didn't do my 12-mile run this weekend. The whole plan is ruined. I can't possibly run the marathon now.
It's over.
And what and what I've learned over the years, and I'm not really built like a marathoner, but I happen to have run a bunch of them, is that if you take an OKRs type approach to your marathon, that is extremely beneficial. And then you're not so much focused on do this and then this and then this, except what do I do if I don't not able to do this one thing in the chain? And so I write it out in the deck of illustrating, okay, so if my goal is, 6 months from now, I want to run a sub 4-hour marathon. Well, I know that, and this partly comes from my experience, I know that there are certain key results that I need to hit on my way there. One of them might be losing 15 pounds in my case. That would probably make me a little bit faster. Another one would be I'm going to work my way up to where I'm going to do 3 long runs of 20 miles or more in the course of my training. I'm not going to worry about exactly what date or what week or whatever, but I know that if I've done those, I'm in pretty good shape. And there are a couple of other goals, average weekly mileage at the peak of training. And I think there's something about being able to sustain a certain pace. But those are kind of the key things, the key progress indicators that I know matter to my ability to run that marathon. And so the objectives are time bound. It says, as of this date, I'm going to do this. And then here are the key results that I know I need to hit on the way. So those
you've achieved that objective.
I'm sorry, what was that, Paige?
It's how you've achieved that objective if you're getting those key results, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's some trial and error involved in that, right? I've run 40 plus marathons at this point in my life. Like, I have a lot of experience. I kind of, a little crazy, but that comes from experience. And so part of the whole OKR mentality, and this is, people struggle with this a lot of time, is you're going to screw them up. Like, you're going to set objectives that you don't meet. Famously, Google runs OKRs, and as far as they're concerned, if you hit 70% of your objectives, that's successful. Because you're not sandbagging, you're setting stuff up there that's out there that's kind of a stretch, and that's a good thing. And you want people to stretch themselves. The other classic thing is sometimes you have to change your key results along the way. You picked something that you thought was a good measure of whether you're going to be able to achieve the objective, but it turned out it wasn't. So let's pivot and do something else. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And for those of you in a startup, I can speak from our experience that there is, we do our best, but 3 months is a long time in the life of a startup, and we are pretty nimble. And so we're trying to give ourselves a little bit of patience and grace as we have to go through and adjust, because we're not fortune tellers either.
Yeah. In your case, at your stage, you might be best off, like your 3 month, your quarter long OKR might be the equivalent of a year long OKR at a later stage. And you're actually cutting that back to, what are we doing this month even?
Right.
And then resetting at the end of the month.
Yeah, definitely. I'm seeing some questions in here talking about kind of different ways to really set yourself up as that strategic partner. Some companies are no longer hiring administrative assistants. I see one comment here saying, and really being able to advocate for yourself. Can you give some advice on either language to use or tips to really help yourself stand out? Because I think that these, especially with technology, like base exists to really help the assistant shine in their role and to take as much of the things floating around that right now have to float around in their brain and automate them, put them into almost like an operating system for assistants so that they can be freed up to be that more strategic partner. But it's not always apparent, like, okay, I've got these 8 hours back in my day. How do I use that to be more strategic?
Yeah, look, I mean, a lot of this is, to me, a lot of the positioning around this, and these are tough conversations to have sometimes, particularly, and I've seen a couple of things in the comments about, if HR has you pigeonholed as, you're just this and you're not that, that can be a tough conversation. But ultimately, it's about, I want to be as good at my job as I can be, and the way that I can be best in my job is if I'm supporting this executive in a way that makes them maximally strategic. And so that we've used that term over and over again, but strategic is really it's almost a key word. You can almost use it as a generic adjective in this situation. I am trying to make myself as strategic a partner as possible to my boss. And so it'd be really helpful to me if I can be somebody who is locked in on these OKRs, who knows what the OKRs or the goals are specifically to begin with, understands why they're important. And then I've got the ability, because the power that you've got is you've got full visibility into that executive's calendar, into their travel schedule, into a lot of stuff that's really opaque to a lot of other people in the organization, particularly at that CEO level. A lot of CEOs kind of come and go as they please and set their own schedules. You've got a ton of visibility that other people in the organization may not have. And so I think your pitch is, I'm really here to help my CEO, help my CFO, whoever it is, be as impactful as possible. And the more that I know, the more that I can help them be that person.
I think that assistants are some of the most ultra influential individuals in the world, and it's like a secret weapon because a lot of people don't quite realize that unless they've come into contact with one of the many amazing assistants out there. It's like not always an obvious thing, but they're so important. When I think about a startup and a small organization, and our head of product and co-founder Jeremy and I have talked a lot about this as we grow, because we've almost doubled in size this year and are continuing to grow pretty rapidly. One of the things that we're looking for, and the employees and the team members that are the most indispensable and valuable to our team, are those who have what we call an owner's mentality. So they seem to understand the big picture and where we're going, and they don't necessarily let the bounds of their role contain them. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that we are asking them to do these things, but it's like a team player plus. And for all of everybody watching here, that would be my very high level general advice to you, whatever framework you're working into, is try to adopt that owner's mentality and use the language, and if you can, the framework of your organization to say, I know what I'm good at, and I'm not going to let the bounds of my role, whatever that might be, hold me back. And I'm just going to go add value where I see that I can. And gosh, I think anybody that you work with is going to have a hard time not appreciating that and valuing that.
I absolutely could not agree more with that. So it's really, I mean, you're demonstrating it's that level up ability, right? Am I somebody who is, there were a lot I've worked in a lot of situations where companies would employ assistants, and really, there's sort of this goal of like, we're going to pay them as little as possible, and they're going to basically manage the travel for our managing directors at the investment bank. And it's like, that's great, but you know what? If you pay, marginally more as a base salary, I bet you could hire somebody who would be an admin plus, who could also sit alongside and help run the CRM or help. This was sort of prior to OKRs, but like, you look at somebody like that and it's like, oh, that's not just somebody who's capable of, going on the corporate travel system, or, using Expedia or whatever, like, and can handle a Rolodex and figure out contacts and so forth, and check an inbox. But like, that's somebody who's really adding additional value. And that's, I think everybody wants to be in that kind of admin plus category.
Mm-hmm. I think that those very reactive task-based roles will disappear. I mean, there's been a lot of talk in our space about, is AI going to replace the assistant? No, never. I feel strongly about this, and that's a hill I will die on. But I think the task-based roles will be automated away just with the proliferation of technology. And so it's more important now than ever before, with who knows what this economy is doing and what next 6, 8, 12 months are going to look like, where we've all got to do more with less, and that means being more strategic, no matter how you slice it. Okay, so we're going to get into Q&A here, and there's so many good ones. But before we make that shift, can you share with everybody again verbally, and we'll drop it in the comments, where to find you? And just a reminder to everybody that we are going to share Tim's deck that he's referenced a handful of times in the follow-up.
Yeah, so it's CXN Advisory, Charlie, Xerox, Nancy. I'm forgetting my NATO alphabet. And it stands for coxswain. There's a whole, if you go on my website, you'll see there's a whole rowing and crew analogy. I was a college rower back in the day. But that is the coxswain, in case you don't know anything about rowing, is the little guy or girl who sits in the stern of the boat and basically steers, and tries to get the 8 people who are rowing the boat in sync. And so, despite not being particularly coxswain sized myself, one of the things when I started doing this work, I realized was that I was basically functioning as a coxswain for a lot of organizations. That I was in the boat, I wasn't pulling on an oar, and much in the same way the assistant is in that role as well. You're there to kind of steer the boat and help keep everybody on course and try to keep things in sync. So so it's Tim at cxnadvisory.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. So a final note to share with you all before we switch to the Q&A section. Some of you may have already seen this, and some of you may have already signed up, because we've got over almost 500 people joining us in this initiative today. And I saw Liz dropped it in the comments too, but just to reiterate it, we've essentially taken a free professional development course and turned it into the form of a 30-day challenge that's really, really simple. And it's based actually on how my assistant Natalie and I work together on specifically aligning her role and goals to mine. And it really helps us make sure that we've got the context, sharing back and forth, and that we're both aware of our progress against goals and what we're focusing on in these short-term snippets of time. So we're going to drop the link into the comments there, but we would love to have you join the nearly 500 assistants who are already in this challenge with us. And it's a rolling challenge, so you don't have to start on a specific day. But the last thing I'll say about this is that of the cohort that's already started, the feedback, both from assistants and their executives, has been really, really outstanding. We're getting way higher response rates from executives. We're getting really positive feedback saying, like, I feel more strategic with my time now. And it's just unheard of. So I encourage you all to check it out. It's free. It only lasts 30 days, and it's a really simple but fun challenge. Okay, so lots of questions here. I'm going to start with, oh, this is an interesting one. I'm assuming it relates to the OKR tracking and alignment. How many execs per assistant would you recommend? I've got an opinion on this personally, but I
want to hear your opinion.
Okay, good. So in my opinion, somewhere in the ballpark of 1 to 3 is ideal. Now it depends on the level of support that assistant is providing, and it just depends on a whole bunch of factors. But simply from a brain space point of view, and the amount of context switching that is added each time you add an executive that you support, 3, I think, is the upper level of ideal. Now, I'm well aware that I'm making a blanket statement here, and that is not a universal truth, but I would imagine the more in-depth that you're getting with OKR and tracking, the less executives that you'd be able to support on that strategic level. So probably somewhere in the 1 to 2 ballpark. But I'd love to hear people's feedback.
I think that my guess is that would probably be right. And I go back to that company where Danny works that we were talking about. She's she's supporting about 3 different executives. The CEO takes up much more of her time than the CFO. But I think that's right. She's kind of in there with 2 of them hardcore on their OKRs.
Yeah, that's great. And so another thing that we're seeing too is assistants supporting maybe a primary executive or maybe 2 primary executives, but also providing some ancillary support to those executives' team members. And usually there's communication and context sharing about the goals and objectives, but not necessarily like inbox management and some of those meatier things to oversee for those executives. But being aligned on that department or that team's goals and objectives can be really, really valuable, and maybe almost on the reverse, help you support more people from a strategic point of view, even if you're doing less things for them. Oh, this is really interesting on the chat. People are sharing how many they support. And I think, I don't know if I've caught them all, but I think the highest I've seen is 4, but maybe there's been someone who supports more than that. But it looks like a lot of them are 1-to-1.
1-to-1. A lot of people are adamant about 1-to-1.
Yeah, which is also a very great way to do it if you can. I think if we look 5-10 years in the future, I think we're going to see more people supported by assistants. Right now, C-suite and VPs are decently well supported, but I think we're going to see what we call knowledge workers supported, where I always say if you don't have an assistant, you are an assistant. And there's so many people that are just leaving leverage and productivity on the table because they're not outsourcing as effectively as they could. And of course, I'm the ultimate champion for assistants here, but I think that that's the direction we're going to go. Okay, another question here. Does my exec have to participate in the challenge? No, they don't at all. You are in control of the outputs that you are sending to them, but it's in the form, the basis of the challenge is you send a daily digest for 30 days, and we provide templates and all of this for you. And then one stream of questions to them each week, usually on a Thursday, that's updating on the progress they're making against their goals and what they're focusing on in the coming week. And it does require, well, the only thing we ask is that you give them feedback, or excuse me, that you ask them for feedback and that they share it with you, because that way the process can then be iterative and make sure that what you're doing is adding value to them. But no, it does not require any sort of change in their workflow. Okay.
Paige, as you were describing that just now, that if you're not currently running goal setting at your company, that kind of weekly conversation with the executive about, it's Thursday. Okay, what are your top things for next week? Tell me what those are, because I want to support you in them. That becomes a really good starting point for starting to think about this stuff, because after a few weeks of this, if it turns out to say, you know what, maybe we need to be more intentional about our goal setting in this. Elevate some of this stuff that we're not getting to, or we're drifting past every week. So.
That's a really great tip. You don't necessarily have to start with this big, massive framework on a quarterly basis. Just say, what are you focusing on right now, and let me make some suggestions. I think whenever possible, it's great to come armed with like, here's what I'm going to try. I saw someone say that their executive loves that they ask for forgiveness instead of permission. And I think that like presumptive yes is a really strong tool that we can have in our toolbox to be like, here's what I suggest, and I welcome your feedback, but otherwise I'm going to move forward with this. And I think that is a great sign to show like you're thinking big picture. I can trust you, and I want to lean on you for help with that. It's really great. Okay, someone shared their end of week questions. What are your priorities next week, and what would feel like winning next week?
Yeah.
Really, really good questions.
And that is particularly that phrasing of what would winning feel like, what would feel like winning next week. That is a very OKR mentality, because a lot of the mentality of OKRs is we're going to set this goal for 3 months from now, and what we're going to define what success looks like. And so a lot of times, with my clients, I'm always like, okay, it is now the end of February, and we have just knocked the cover off the ball on this objective that we set. What does the world look like? Describe that for me. And that's how we end up setting what the objectives are. And that's why so often they are aspirational, because you're trying to think about, like, if the team executes with maximum effectiveness and efficiency, what are we going to create here that's great and new? And so I love that, what would feel like winning.
Yeah. I love that. And those two questions that Katie just dropped in here are the ones that we actually suggest with the 30-day challenge too. And it's what talked about Natalie a lot on this call, but that's what she asked me every Thursday. And it's so valuable it takes me, 10, 15 minutes. She blocks time on my calendar and sends them to me in a decision stream. And I sit down and I write everything. And then it really helps her too in the coming week when there are the invariable influx of like requests for time or, whatever brush fire that comes up. She knows what she can say yes to and no to. And I think that's taken a lot of the brain power, I guess, out of having to make those decisions, because she can just reference framework versus having to like think about each situation individually, which isn't necessarily a good use of her time because she's such a strategic partner to me.
I'll jump in with one thing there, which is that OKRs or any effective set of goals, ultimately for you, they ought to serve as a filter, right? And it becomes that filter of like what's important versus what's not. So the brush fires are going to come up, and some of them can be ignored because frankly they're not that important and they seem urgent. It's that whole urgent versus important matrix. But like, no, I'm not going to waste a lot of time on this because it's not ultimately pushing us forward. And so it's a very effective filter for you and for your executive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I cannot believe how fast this hour has gone by. And I'd love to turn it to you, Tim, for some closing thoughts on what's one or two things that people can do today to start on OKR alignment.
Yeah, so I think the 30-day challenge is a great setup for that conversation, because you're asking the questions that inevitably lead to, oh, okay, well, this is what's most important for us, and ultimately your goal is to get to objectives that are reflective of what's most important to the company. So you can either start at the very top and you can come in and try to, if your organization lacks an effective mission, you, I suppose, could come in and try to convince everybody we really need to do some strategic planning. And some people are open to that, but that can be a tough thing to do, particularly from the assistant role. But instead, it's almost, you're doing it, it's sort of a bottoms up. It's almost like a guerrilla war. You're really saying, how am I going to do my job most effectively in support of you? It's by knowing what the most important things are, and then evolving that conversation into, okay, well, maybe we should institutionalize that. What are our goals over the next 3 months or month or whatever that would be?
Yeah,
so,
I love that.
And then, of course, feel free to reach out if you want some of that strategic planning help or any assistance in getting an OKR system set up. That's kind of what I'm here for. So would love to be helpful in that regard as well, and happy to have a conversation with anyone.
Yes, Tim has been so helpful for us. And we're going to go back to these questions and make sure that we try to catch all the ones that we didn't get to answer live. So thank you so much, Tim.
My pleasure.
One thing I did see a lot of questions come through about tasks, and we launched our task list manager in Base at our summit almost 2 weeks ago now, which is hard to believe. And it's going so well. And there's some really specific things in there that make it unique for assistants. But we know one of the pain points of using a new task manager is getting all of your tasks into that. So if this is something you're interested in trying, but maybe haven't yet because you don't want to get your tasks over, we're actually going to host a task manager or a task migration party next week, November 12th, where we're going to have a custom playlist, and we're all collaborating on that too. And we're going to be giving away prizes and have a fun conversation. It'll be right here in our Facebook community. So I hope that you all join us for that, and we'll be able to continue the discussion over how our tasks playing into this alignment with your executives' goals, objectives, their OKRs, and how are we using tasks strategically to be that partner. So thank you, everybody who joined us, especially Tim. We appreciate you so much here at Base.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And we will be in touch with more details.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Have a good